Hey there, it's Friday, February 25th. I'm Jeff Timmer, and you're watching Lunch with Lincoln. Thank you for joining us today. Just as a little background, back in the 80s, I studied Soviet politics in college. Then in 1990, I had my wedding reception at the Ukrainian Cultural Center in Warren, Michigan. Michigan has a huge Ukrainian population. I've read every Tom Clancy and Mark Graney Gray Man novel. I've watched this TV series Chuck, and I have a Twitter account. And so that qualifies me as an expert on geopolitics in today's world. Kidding aside, joining us today is an actual expert in what's going on in the world, expert in Russia and East Europe and the CIA, John Sipher, who has maybe the greatest name ever in the world of clandestine service, is joining us today. John, thank you for being here.
My pleasure. It's nice to be with you, Jeff. We have a lot of fun bantering back and forth on Twitter. It's nice to do it in person.
Yeah. Well, let's take a look at an ad the Lincoln Project put out this week with some of Donald Trump's comments about Vladimir Putin.
The people of Crimea, from what I've heard, would rather be with Russia than where they were.
Do you like Vladimir Putin's comments about you?
Sure. When people call you brilliant, it's always good, especially when the person heads up Russia.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, also as a person that kills journalists, political opponents, and invades countries. Obviously, that it would be a concern, would it not?
He's running his country, and at least he's a leader. Unlike what we have in this country.
Yeah, but again, he kills journalists that don't agree with him.
Well, I think our country does plenty of killing also, Joe. So.
Putin's a killer.
A lot of killers. We got a lot of killers. Why, you think our country's so innocent?
No, think of it. It's Russia, after all. Somebody said, are you at all offended that he said nice things about you? I said, no.
In all fairness to Putin, you're saying he killed people. I haven't seen that. I don't know that he has. Have you been able to prove that? Do you know the names of the reporters that he's killed?
I had a call with President Putin and congratulated him on the victory, his electoral victory. I want to thank him because we're trying to cut down on payroll. We'll save a lot of money. I like him because he called me a genius.
The people of Crimea, from what I've heard, would rather be with Russia than where they were.
The reason I think that's an important place to start this discussion is the attack on Ukraine didn't start this week. It started long ago. It started back in 2016 when Putin, or even before, when Putin set out, when you look at the trillions of dollars that have been spent on defense since World War II, Putin took a few $1 million on Facebook and has caused such a disruption and destabilization of American politics and the Western alliance. It's brought us to the point where we're divided, and he was able to take the military moves he's made this week. At least that's how I see it, John.
Yeah, watching that is a reminder. I mean, I remember during the Vietnam War, people were so angry that Jane Fonda went to North Vietnam and were supporting our enemies. Well, Donald Trump right now is supporting people who are murdering an innocent country and innocent people. Ukraine did nothing. They were no threat to Russia whatsoever. And we are trying to support them because they're a democratic country trying to move to the West, and he's murdering their people now, and Donald Trump is supporting him. And essentially it's unconscionable.
And, we're seeing Fox News, people like Tucker Carlson saying that, he's taking the Russian side. I mean, he says it point blank that, he's siding with Putin over Ukraine. We've got the right-wing outrage propaganda machine that's gearing up and has geared up and is pushing out all these Russian propaganda and it's pervasive. We've got a situation now where in the past we would have had a united America. Republicans, Democrats would have come together and condemned this kind of action. But now you're seeing Republican politicians, leading Republican voices, leading voices on the right that are taking the side of enemies of the United States, right down to Donald Trump. I mean, coming out and saying Putin's a genius. This is savvy, what he's done. I mean, it's like if Trump would have just declared Ontario part of the United States. I think it's ours, and then we send troops in. It's insane.
Well, I mean, this is sort of the thing that's the poison that's going through our political system is people look at their domestic political opponents and they see them as true enemies. And so therefore they think anybody outside is not an enemy, and anybody that supports me, even if there are true enemies, I'm going to support them. And so this is really, really dangerous. I mean, we saw Trump did it all the way through his presidency. If you praised him, he would support you no matter how awful you were. And, we have to be smart. After World War II, conservatives, Republicans, Democrats, liberals came together to create this, what we call rules-based order, right? So with the UN and about sanctity of borders, and we've created the world's greatest success story that has had the greatest increase in wealth, the greatest increase in health, the greatest increase in safety in world history, technology growth, all these things. And I think Americans, and frankly Europeans too, have forgotten the benefits that we've gotten from that, and forgotten that you need to defend that. That's really important. Those things are important. So this notion that, who cares, and if Vladimir Putin goes across borders, what we're doing is we're moving to a world that doesn't have rules, doesn't have regulations, is not a Western-led, United States-led world. Well, you can act like, that's fine because it's hurting Joe Biden, in today's polls. But I think Americans are going to find that kind of dog-eat-dog jungle world that Vladimir Putin and China will try to run is going to hurt Americans for years, economically, in every possible way. And so one of the things I think the Biden administration needs to do better is explain to Americans why this is important. There's a lot of people clearly aren't listening, but we're really foolishly running into the jaws of death here.
Now, you spent time during your career in Moscow, in the Soviet Union, and I assume you have great familiarity with Ukraine. We're seeing clips of protests in Moscow, St. Petersburg, Russians taking to the streets. That's in great putting themselves in great peril. What role does the United States, does the West, does NATO play in helping to create the circumstances, to helping to instigate that kind of protest?
I think that's a great point. And I just said, I think the administration needs to communicate to Americans how important this is. But something that we all need to do in the West and all allies is try to communicate to the Russian people, because other than Ukrainians here who are being murdered on the streets, the Russian people are actually the losers here. Vladimir Putin, just like the czars before him and the Communist Party chief, doesn't give a whit about his own people. He's essentially thrown them under the bus here. So he's sort of put out so that Russia is going to become a pariah. Their economy is going to be in the doldrums for years because of sanctions. They're now giving in to be essentially a supplicant to China. He's increased repression and thrown people in jail in Russia. And he's sending kids to be, to come back in body bags and, like chattel. And so the Russians, they've been getting all of this disinformation and fake information for years. They know that they can't really participate in the political system because they don't have free and fair elections. They don't have a free judiciary. They have a dictator who's been there for 20 years. But as they start to see what's happening here, they're going to be the ones that realize, oh my gosh, our country is being sold out by our leader. And so we need to do everything we can to push that kind of information into Russia, whether it's via covert means or whether it's through, open internet means. But I think that's critically important here, because the thing that Vladimir Putin fears the most, let's face it, all of this stuff that's happening, he's got all kinds of reasons. He wants America out of Europe. He wants NATO to die. He wants vassals on his borders. All those things are true. But all of this game, like for any dictator, is to stay in power. Right? Your job is survival, day-to-day survival. sort of like a prisoner, like, I may die tomorrow, but I'm going to kill you today. Like he's sort of a survival thing here. And so the thing that he fears the most is being dragged into a sewer like Gaddafi was in Libya. Yeah. And so anything that we can do to make the Russian people realize that they're being led by a tyrant is to our benefit.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I tweeted yesterday that people like Ceausescu and Gaddafi and Mubarak were in complete and total control of their countries, ruled it with an iron fist, right up until the moment they didn't. And I think that that's important here. It doesn't seem like the Putin regime could be toppled unless it is. And that's what we need to be aware of. Now there would be a potential even greater destabilization should that happen. And that's when we're dealing with a devil we know. The devil we don't know is potentially positive, but it could also be potentially negative for kind of the geopolitical stability, at least in the short term.
I suppose that's true, but this is really up to the Russian people. They don't have a voice as it is now, and Putin, by being a dictator and essentially changing the constitution so he can stay in power forever, has made it so there's essentially no way out for people. And so, if he was a real leader, he would create leaders behind him. He would create a system that allowed for a fair transition of power, but he hasn't done that. So if the transition in Russia is bloody and destabilizing, it's because Vladimir Putin has set it up that way. And that's unfortunate. But right now, Vladimir Putin is an enemy to the West. He has been for a long time, and he's considered us an enemy. He's been attacking us, frankly, for years. And so we have to, when someone says they're at war with you, you should listen.
To the extent that you can you lift back the veil a little bit and let us know, what would the CIA be doing in Russia right now? The kind of things that would be public knowledge. What kind of thing, the stuff that we read about in spy novels or spy movies. What's going on behind the scenes that you could reveal for us?
Well, I worked in Moscow, and I ran as the deputy of our Worldwide Russia program, which oversaw Moscow from Washington later on. Moscow is an incredibly hard place to work. They're as repressive and paranoid and conspiratorial inside the country as they are outside. They obviously, he's repressing and keeping his own people at bay, so there's no opposition. They're even more paranoid about, the CIA or Westerners trying to figure out what they're up to. So when I worked there, we were trying to run spies, but we were under surveillance nonstop, and that's not hyperbole. I mean, if I got up and walked out of my place at 3 a.m, there was a team of people all ready to follow me wherever I went for as long as it took. I had video and audio in my house, and that's also not a joke. Video, audio. If you went to the bathroom or went to bed, they were watching you and listening to everything you said, and they tracked you everywhere. They contacted every person you talked to. They tried to get people to run back against you. If you went around a corner and they didn't see you, they'd bring dogs back behind to see if you left anything. They'd go through the mailbox, all of these type of things. So what we try to do is, we're trying to get sources of information to tell us what's going on in the Kremlin, because the Kremlin is, a hermetically sealed thing. Now, to get to the point you're sort of talking about, what kind of things can we do? What kind of things are being done now? What's interesting is the CIA, since its beginning, has had sort of two pieces. One is a collection and analysis side, just spying and then giving it to a professional analytic cadre so that analysis can go to policymakers. And then it was also given the power to do what's called covert action, to take action. And in the early years, everybody remembers, overthrowing the Iranian regime and in Latin America and these type of things. Now, in recent years, there's obviously been less of that. A lot of those things have backfired over the years and sort of come back to haunt us. But the CIA does maintain those capabilities and responsibilities if a president of the United States writes a written finding asking the CIA to do that. Now, what's interesting is Vladimir Putin has lived off the lie to his own people that his economic problems, any political problems, are caused by the United States and the CIA in particular, that is trying to interfere in his government, trying to support opposition, trying to support media to go against him. Completely untrue. There's been no effort by U.S. to try to covertly or in any way do regime change, overthrow him, support opposition. Now, there's overt efforts. There's democratic, NGOs and others that have tried to work with Russian, parties and all these type of things. And essentially what Putin's done is had all those people stopped and arrested as well. But what can happen is the CIA does have that capability. If the Biden administration decided that, one of the things we need to do to push back against Putin is to support opposition and independent media in Russia, to push information into Russia, for example, Zelensky's speech, or, to let Russian citizens know what their government is up to, or it could even be more sort of nefarious, try to, upset the Kremlin and put in false and disinformation. We certainly could do that. We're not doing it. We haven't done it, despite the fact that Putin has been living off the fact that, oh, these people are doing this, that's why the economy is so bad. It's because of the Americans. Those are lies. But now, we could do it. So it's interesting to me, as this crisis goes on and we look for ways to push back against Putin, I think that's something we should definitely consider.
Sure. When the White House and NATO is gauging their reaction to each move made by Putin, they take in all kinds of things into account. We heard yesterday President Biden talk about the expansion of sanctions, but the sanctions right now still haven't specifically, or at least as they've announced, targeted Putin directly. Why do you think that is? Why is this just so that they maintain some chits to throw down on the table at certain points, or what's the strategy that goes into these kinds of decisions?
Yeah, I mean, what makes this hard here is you're dealing with a large NATO's a large block of countries and a lot of allies that need to be conferred with, discussed with, all have their own economic interests and ties. And so when you talk about really hard-hitting sanctions, you sort of got to get everybody on board, because if one of the big players says, no, we're not playing along because this is going to harm our energy needs or something else, it's difficult work. And I give the administration credit for really trying to pull together and do this kind of stuff. But the notion that we should really be holding back here, I mean, I think the sense is, right, that you always, if you don't have many weapons, and we can go into this later, but we walked into this crisis pretty weak without a lot of weapons. And the administration's been trying to do everything it could to pull things together, to get our allies together, to put troops into Europe, to give weapons to Ukraine, to push out intelligence, to make it clear to Vladimir Putin that we knew what he was up to, so that he couldn't hoodwink the world. So we're trying to put and sanctions, to put all those things together, hoping to stop him, to make sure that when he made his calculus, he'd think hard. Now that didn't work, despite best efforts. I think they've done a good job, because multiple administrations have done a bad job dealing with Putin, which made him think there's no consequences and he can push forward. But now, I tend to think it's a mistake. I think, hoping that, okay, maybe if we just leave up a little, then Putin will get the message and change course. Well, Putin's not going to change course. He's made it clear he hates us. He hates Ukraine. He wants Ukraine to go away. He's still talking about them as Nazis and drug addicts, and they need to be snuffed out in the outhouse. End of story. This man should be, any kind of weapon we have, economic sanction, anything we can use, should be used at this point. So I understand the administration is, trying to maintain some flexibility or ability here to have more things up its sleeve. But, in my view, now's the time to just deploy those things.
I was watching my Twitter feed yesterday, and there was a lot of chatter about, Putin's gone over the edge. He's lost his mind. He's unstable. He's is he crazy? How do you read him? I mean, it seems like, acting crazy is as much of a strategic move for him as actually being crazy. Making people think he's nuts and, we don't know what he's going to do could be a strategic tool that he's using.
Yeah. He's to understand Vladimir Putin, you have to understand he's a KGB career officer. And in the KGB, they call themselves Chekists, proud Chekists. There's a Chekist day every day in December. He makes sure he's there. And the Cheka was the original Bolshevik security service. And they openly called it a terrorist organization. Their job was to keep the leadership in power at all costs, which meant assassinating, liquidating any potential domestic enemies or opposition, and creating a foreign intelligence service which could do the same and keep enemies off bay. And they, throughout the Soviet period, they did an incredible amount of everything from assassinations to plots to try to, spread false information and disinformation. They ran, concentration camps and all sorts of things. But he takes great pride in growing up through that sort of that system. He grew up, working with foreign terrorist groups to try to hurt NATO and the United States. He grew up with, trying to smuggle money and steal things from the West and put out false information. The story that the U.S. created the AIDS crisis, or that U.S. is selling baby parts around the world, or the U.S. assassinated this leader or that leader, all these sort of fake things. So you have to understand, when you see Vladimir Putin, he's someone who's been weaponizing lies his whole life. And he uses the security services as sort of his main weapon. We saw it in the 2016 election, messing with our elections. We've seen it in massive, nonstop disinformation. Anything that's a source of concern or anger in the United States, they've stoked it. Everything from Colin Kaepernick kneeling to vaccine information. The Russians have tried to push out false information and cause Americans to attack each other and hate each other. And so that's the person that Vladimir Putin is. Now, I have to say, is the last couple speeches about Ukraine, I assume that he's always used lies. Like I said, the lie that the CIA is trying to destabilize him, for example. He's used those lies, but he understood that those were lies. He's got a world-class intelligence service. He's a career KGB officer. He would assume that, yes, I'm using these lies strategically or tactically, but they're lies. Listening to him recently, the anger and the sort of, the vociferous way he's doing these things, you almost say, is he believing these lies now? So it was a little surprise to me that, some of the things that I hear him saying now, it could be the KGB officer, or he's been in power so long, he's got nobody providing him any information that he might not already want to agree with. He's got these sort of grievance, he's like Trump in a way. He's like a grievance machine and anger at, humiliations from years ago. And so he's decided to destroy Ukraine. And that's not a rational, sensible thing for anybody to do. And so there's two things here. It's Vladimir Putin, the sort of cagey person who uses lies for his own purpose. And he's done that for years, and he's been very consistent. Then there's what we're seeing recently. And so it's not clear whether he's gone over the edge a little bit here, or whether this is just, some long prepared plan. You're muted. I'm glad to just talk forever if you want me to do that. Yeah, somebody got to get off the mute thing here. There you go.
Okay. Apologize for technical difficulties there. Maybe if you could lift back the veil just one more time on, at the CIA headquarters at Langley, how many people are analyzing what's going on and, reporting up to the top level people who are looking at this speech and preparing, how does it work? What do they prepare? Who do they present it to? How are these decisions analyzed and then presented to, Joe Biden in the White House? Because, that kind of analysis is what fuels these decisions.
Sure. Well, the CIA actually is a pretty small organization compared to sort of the larger intelligence community. I mean, there's more FBI special agents in New York City than we have intelligence collectors around the world from CIA. But so there's a collection operation. That's me, the clandestine service. These guys that live overseas, try to run spies that collect information that the U.S. can't get any other way. So if the U.S. can get information from open sources or from diplomats or military attaches or satellites or anything else, you don't need people like me trying to find a human who can steal information for us. So that's a value add piece. You put together everything else, like I said, experts, media, satellite collection, all these kind of things that go into a professional analyst cadre. And that's what you're talking about. So CIA has a professional analytic cadre with sort of experts on everything from Russian missiles to, Libyan politics to, Japanese economy. And they spend their career pulling all of these things together to go to the policymakers and try to make them as smart, or if policymakers have specific questions on specific things, those analysts pull together what the community knows. And it's a massive community. We have, people who are listening to things. We have people who are decrypting and encrypting things. We have satellites. We have underwater capabilities. And so all of this stuff on Russia is coming together, and analysts are putting it together. Now, as you know, through the Cold War, this was massively focused on the Soviet Union and Russia. And as the Cold War ended, we sort of moved into different places. And after 9/11, much of the resources of CIA and other places were focused on terrorism, which was sort of a very difficult, different kind of thing to collect, and capturing and killing or finding information on terrorist things. So up until sort of what we saw the Russians doing in 2016, we were sort of less focused on what Russia was up to. But now it's pretty clear, and we have a pretty strong cadre of analysts and others that are putting things together. So every day, it's sort of a two-way street. Biden and his team are provided sort of the intelligence community's best analysis on everything, to include what is Putin thinking, what is the Russian military up to, what is the thinking of the Russian foreign ministry, how is the Russian economy. All of these things are sort of put together and provided to the White House. The White House can also query and ask questions and say, I need a study on this. I need you to tell me more about that. And the intelligence community will try to go and put it together. So the administration is getting, an incredibly wide variety and pretty focused information. And we saw some of that recently because the administration, unlike in past times, decided to put some of that out publicly. We were trying to put intelligence into the ether for a change to try to influence Vladimir Putin. We were trying to make it clear to him as he was considering going to war, we want you to know that we know what you're up to. We want you to know that when you're going to lie and say that this thing happened to start a war, we're onto that. We're going to tell the public. And so I think that using information, intelligence information like that is sort of a new thing. It's sort of in Putin's playbook, using information almost as information warfare. Now, of course, this is true information as opposed to disinformation that the Russians use. And so that's a little bit new. And frankly, if you look at what the intelligence community said was going to happen, it's almost completely accurate. All of the fake false flag attempts, all of the things that the Russians were going to say they were going to do and when they were going to do it and what actually happened. And so it's that kind of intelligence that the White House gets. And I think they're fairly well informed, but any president has to juggle not only just what the intelligence says, but what's happening in domestic politics, what's happening with our allies, what are they asking us to do, what are they asking us to avoid. They have to balance and juggle all of this stuff. And so the intelligence community is just one piece in a much larger puzzle that any administration has to put together.
As we head toward the end of the show here, what's one thing that we need to be wary of and be on the watch for here in the United States as this war in Ukraine proceeds? What should we be looking out for in the disinformation sphere?
Yeah, so, we haven't really gotten good at this yet because the Russians, using disinformation, it's not a difficult thing to do anymore. In the Cold War, like I said, they would make up a fake story and somehow get it into the media ecosystem and use it against us, like the fake story that we created the AIDS virus, which went all over Africa and convinced a lot of people that, the United States was behind AIDS, which is, completely untrue. Nowadays, you can almost see what Americans are doing to each other, crazy. Someone's attacking someone, they can just amplify and stoke and exploit that kind of information and push it forward. So yes, we have to get more savvy about disinformation. We have to stop, in this game of attacking each other and assuming our enemies are other Americans rather than people like the Russians, for example, or the Chinese here. And cyber attacks, we're going to see more and more of this to try to hurt our economy, to try to mess with our communication systems. But the more important thing is sort of the bigger picture. We have to understand that what's happening is really important to us. Just saying, forget it, who cares about these people, is another nail in the coffin of democracy. There's a lot of problems domestically, we saw on January 6th and other kind of things that you and Lincoln Project are very focused on. But there's an overseas point to this too. The United States plays an important role overseas. We have important partners around the world. There's a system that's benefited us tremendously. That system's important and it's under threat now. And if we don't care or if we let Vladimir Putin win, it's going to hurt us terribly economically and in every other way domestically.
Well, John Sipher, thank you for joining us today. Thank you for sharing your expertise, lifting back the curtains on what goes on in places like Moscow and places like the CIA headquarters. I think it's fascinating, and I really appreciate your expertise and you willing to share it with our audience.
Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate it. I appreciate what you're doing. We'll continue our Twitter battles, and I'm just glad my dogs didn't start going crazy. So that's the good news here.
Well, as we close here, if you're wondering and you're watching, how can I get involved? How can I help? Lincoln Project is launching what we're calling the Union. You can sign up. You can sign up online at theunion.us, and you can learn how you can lend your voice, how you can play a part in making contributing to saving democracy here in the U.S., helping in the 2022 election, and helping play a role in combating the disinformation that we talked about on the show today.